Sorry, that's the Peloton in the background makes the shot. All right, everybody, welcome back. We are here. This is going to be a special one, the pre-Thanksgiving episode or something. Exactly. We're here for
pre-food coma.
Pre-food coma. Well, after food coma, we might be even less well-behaved. But we are here for another one of your questions about work. For those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. I've been collaborating with Jason on one thing or another for, I don't even want to say how long. But we are investors in his company, which is REDEF, and curates news from all over the internet. You can follow Media REDEF on Twitter. We first met when Jason was at MySpace, but he's one of the guys who has been thinking about how technology and culture intersect for probably literally longer than anybody else who I've worked with professionally. First head of digital at MTV, kind of his company Slingbox kind of invented the concept that you should be able to have what we now call it, I don't even think we call it a DVR anymore. I'm aging myself, of watching your shows whenever you want to. Josh Schachter saying hello. So now, okay, we know who's listening. Hello, Schachter. All right. So thank you for doing this. We're going to start with one question, then we're going to riff on others. But I know that your writing has been essential in your career and life. And one of my observations is many of the most successful business leaders, surprisingly, are extraordinarily good writers, which is not something you'd necessarily predict. And so the question is, how can I make my writing more compelling?
You know, I was someone who didn't do well in high school per se, and I went to a school that was very much like, for lack of a better term, sort of a Dead Poet Society type school where you did things a certain way. There was a certain way to write. There was a certain Latin. And, you know, I am a guy that has, my own voice, and I speak in a colloquial way. And when I started REDEF, which is a newsletter business, I didn't think I was a good writer, but I was sort of filling in for the person that I wanted to hire for me. And then I would go run the company. And what I've learned, and through some of my jobs like at MTV, where I was the digital person in a television company very early on in the days of digital, and people didn't want to be preached to, and they didn't want to think they were wrong or missing something.
People, you mean the executives with whom you worked at MTV?
Viacom bought my company, and yet I don't think they really knew what it was or what they wanted to do. They just needed a guy.
Yeah.
And I was pretty outspoken, but I didn't realize that I had to sell stuff in. And I think this will shock some of the people listening that know me, but I'm not a politician. And astonishing. And I think I had to learn how to become a politician. And I have to say, because of my personality or my nature inside of a meeting or my bluntness, I think the writing softens stuff. And in the beginning, it really turns out, which is if you write in an antiseptic way that doesn't sound like you, it'll never come across. So the reason I reference high school is because in conclusion, and these kinds of ways that you would learn how to write.
That's not how you write in a business environment.
I speak in a fragmented way. I use examples in pop culture and things that I think that the room would understand in order to get a point across. And even in a world where data-oriented pieces are becoming, the more obvious thing to write, you're trying to get a scale of people. There are some people who are creatives that don't get data. There are some people who are data that don't get creative. And how do you tell a story in a compelling way so that a novice and an expert can understand it, and the data is presented in such a way that it isn't like me, like when I was in geometry at Horace Mann and I looked in on the trigonometry class and I'm like, I'm never going to be able to do that.
But so hold on. Because when I think of your writing, I think of the rants that come at the top of your newsletter, which sometimes are like a quick observation. And sometimes it's like a whole essay on some thought on something. It's not exactly stream of consciousness, though. You're not writing exactly what you're thinking. So there's more to it than just not doing the topic sentence. I have 3 points. What is there?
I have a tough time writing. And it isn't stream of consciousness. Maddie Karras, who runs Music REDEF for us, always tells me just write and edit later. And I can't help myself sometimes when I'm editing in my head. But really what I try to do is there's something that I'm interested in. And then what does that tie into? Does it tie into cultural? Does it tie into business? Does it tie into something creative? And then how do you tell a story? And really what I usually do is start with the beginnings of something on why this matters to me. So I'll give you an example of how I walked through a recent piece that I wrote. So two things were there. So I saw Clubhouse launch, and it was fascinating to me because I had seen Mark Andreessen on Clubhouse. Then I saw him talk about Clubhouse. Then I saw him invest in Clubhouse. Then I saw him put people that he knew in his network and Ben's network and the entire company on Clubhouse. And I also know Mark relatively well in terms of discussions every couple of years. And I know he has issues with the media, in that the narrative that he wants to tell sometimes isn't what the media is writing about. And some of it may be snarky and nasty and wrong, and some of it may be hard to hear. And I called when I was thinking about this, and I saw that some journalists were shut out. I thought to myself, wow, this is interesting. Mark has invested and built what I call the self-interest stack, which is a dangerous concept. And I started to think about politics, which is if you have a newsroom that is partisan and doesn't care about being checked by their own people, how dishonest can that become? So how do you weave in someone you admire in Mark, a product that is launching and is starting to see the hockey stick, but is getting a lot of either complaints or they're saying that it's artificial growth, but also look at the real world and what's going on with politics and partisan media. And then how do I make this personal to me? And then how do I speak about it in a way that sounds like me?
Yeah.
And the greatest,
I just gotta say, what I hear in that is you're starting with a relationship with the reader, which is basically about you. And I even a lot of the ways you write touch that, even like the fact you shout out readers' birthdays and stuff like that. And then the second thing that I hear you saying is context, is you're connecting the thing to other things in the world that people may care about. And then there's just voice. It's like things like word choice. And I found in my own writing, and I was a good writer in school, and I've worked very hard to unlearn some of those lessons, but I keep some of them. I mean, I still believe in like clear, short, declarative sentences, that kind of thing. Is I find if I read it out loud and I sound like an asshole, then I should probably edit it. And
I am basically like the branch link in the evolution of man. I basically stopped right after caveman.
There you go.
So I don't know big words. I know how I talk. And if someone says to me, wow, I was reading that and I heard you, not the concept necessarily, but just the voice, then I know I'm getting through. And I'll also say that a lot of writing often says like what people don't understand or what's wrong about stuff, which is in general, the concept that I come from is that I'm a fan of the space or I'm a fan of a topic. And being a fan of a topic, you have license to be a critic or to ask questions.
You write as an enthusiast critic as opposed to a lecturing smarter person.
Yeah, and I assume that I'm the proxy for the audience. And there's part of the audience that is a little smarter than I am, and part of the audience that it doesn't have the point of view that I have or doesn't know what I know. And I use my access to get some facts. There's never an essay I write where I don't ask questions of the audience and myself without even answering them.
You know, I want to say that I think there's another powerful insight in there, which is not just talking about how it relates to you personally. The way many of us were taught to write in school, many of us learned, was to be this sort of fake objective observer from this universalist, rationalist perspective, which can be super condescending. And it doesn't put you into it. And you're saying it's not just about what appeals to you personally, it's that you have this stance toward the material. In your case, it's the stance of an enthusiast, of a fan. It might be somebody else's might be the stance of a long-suffering employee or whatever it is, but you have to know your role relative to the thing you're writing about and be transparent about that.
You know, the words persuasion or con are not bad words to me. So when I reread my essay and I say, did I ask the right questions? Did I sound like I was pontificating? Did I betray a confidence in some cases? You know, if you start off an essay, you know, everything is about headlining these days and the first paragraph. And if you start off an essay, which basically is, I'm smarter than you, you're going to lose some of the audience. And by the way, most of my readers are smarter than me. But my point is, I'm in there trying to figure it out.
You know the difference between me and I, for example, which you do not.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say, like, I really ask a lot of questions that I don't answer because to me, I want that person reading that essay to sort of leave it and say, I've got something to think about. And I think, you know, if you think about product evolution, there's something there. But it's really around. I have to say there was a moment, as you know, I got sick a couple of years ago. I had a heart surgery.
Yeah.
And I really was using the writing in a way to become cathartic, because it was interesting where I was being more honest to a public than I was to my closest inner circle. And something clicked in me about the vulnerability when you're writing. When the audience feels your vulnerability, and I don't care if they're your enemy or your fan or your friend, they all have vulnerabilities that they haven't spoken about, that they're scared to speak about. And when you hit those notes, whether business, personal, health, a level of trust between you and the audience comes through,
Well,
and you have them for life.
And I express love through interruption, so here I go.
Yeah.
The way we usually talk about vulnerability in the workplace is admission of frailty, that's a part of it for sure. But the other thing I hear in what you're saying, which I think is a very powerful kind of vulnerability, is I've never seen you write something where it's like, here's the definitive view because this is settled. It always feels like it's describing a work in progress. And there's a certain modesty to that. Like, hey, this may end up in a totally different place. I could be wrong. And I do think that has the power of not just the power of that one piece, but it draws somebody in the long-term journey of how is Jason's view on this going to evolve? And then it's almost like a series where I want to know what the next episode is going to be of what Jason's view is going to be.
Well, by the way, one of the best things to write ever for me, and Maddie will say the same thing on music, is when you are wrong.
Yeah.
And the follow-up. And you and I were discussing this the other day on the phone. I'd say the only place where I was really definitive about being right and I was not right was my take on morality and ethics of all that was going on inside of the country. I thought that there was some sort of base level that we all agreed upon. And what's fascinating about the velocity of information you get these days, but also the volume of information, is never before in my life have I felt myself changing in the moment. What I wrote 4 weeks ago, definitively based off of life experience, may be different as I dig deeper into things that I may have overtly
what changed
dismissed.
in your view on that? Like, if you had to advise your past self on your view of what was happening in society, because I know you've had a lot of views on how CEOs have related to this, and I do want to come to your health stuff before we wrap. But if you
I don't want to get into. I want to be vague about the politic, but I'll say I was having a discussion with my fiance last night because we were watching Yellowstone. And Yellowstone is a wonderful show written by someone named Taylor Sheridan, who did Sicario and Hell or High Water. And what I find interesting about this show, while it is a soap opera, is it is set in a part of the country that you do not see a lot on TV, with a group of people that you do not see a lot on TV, who don't write a lot, who don't have the voice, rich or poor. And we live in a country which has federal, state, and local government. And you know what? The way people do things in one place are not the way they do things in other places. And federal and state and local may also disagree. And there may be a sense of base morality in some of their decisions. And yet they may be against the law, or they may be against your morality. And I have to say that there is when you start to understand the other side, even if you disagree, it could only help your writing. And one of the problems that I have right now is in a world, and this is not meant to slight LinkedIn, but in a world that kids are growing up today on LinkedIn, where essays are written every day, specifically around business, and it's 7 ways to sell your company, 8 ways to do this. And I can tell you, I got thrown out of high school. I'm barely literate. Math scares me.
The one thing that ever bugged me out about you, you're like, book, I don't do books. And I was like, oh shit. I hope we could be.
Well, by the way, I read a lot of books, but I read them I do read them in a non-linear fashion through the index, and I don't really finish one. But what I find fascinating about all that is that at the end of the day, whatever success I've had was course correcting. There was no grand plan. My favorite quote on this, and it's something to think about when you're writing, is that in the Eagles documentary, Joe Walsh says, when you look back at your life, it seems like a finely crafted novel, but it wasn't. Yeah. So everyone reading on LinkedIn is either brainwashed in some cases, or they've reinterpreted their past as to how it happened.
I don't think it's all the writer's fault. The writer and the reader transaction. I mean, we want 7 easy ways, some of us. And so, I think this is actually the critical question on a national level in some ways, but let's just talk about what we know about the world of business for a second. How much difference can you have within a community and still be able to collaborate? And all these statements, and you and I have talked about this before, around no politics in the workplace. One of my issues with it, where I think it's bad CEOing to declare no politics, is that what counts as politics to that CEO may not count as politics to their, employee who felt like because of the color of their skin, they were harassed on the way to the office. And so who gets to define what the issues are is a big deal. And CEOs don't control that anymore.
There really isn't anything that is, and this was a naivete. So about 4 months ago, as I saw Twitter rolling out all these new functions and we're getting very excited, I wrote, is there a way for me to just press a button, get no politics in my feed? Because I internalize stuff, I get very upset. My blood pressure goes up on Twitter. And Sharon Waxman, who runs the Wrap, said, well, define politics. And I'm not speechless often, and I was pretty much speechless because it is different for everyone. And I'm not talking about a stance. I'm talking about where the subject goes. And it's interesting. One of the things about the internet is you can reach out to people of like minds. You can network with people. You could use your writing to let you know. And yesterday, as I was thinking about this topic, I saw an essay on Medium, and the topic of the essay is writing is networking for introverts. And one of the things that I found is I've gone out to people who I admire who are introverts, and their writing is phenomenal. And, if you're someone inside of a company, junior or not, there's only so many speaking times you could have in a meeting. People don't want to be preached to. There's an operating level, and then there's a future level. But what writing allows you to do is to hold the stage. It's evergreen. You could put your idea out there, and you could give it the kind of detail and backup that you need from data, from personal experience. And it's not just networking for the introvert. It's a calling card. And I can't tell you how many people who have written for us have gotten the jobs they wanted because they were able to put together a vision that someone else would write. When I publish, by 11 a.m., I will get 20, 30 emails from CEOs, business development people, headhunters saying, do you know this person? Or even my own piece, can you come in and talk about this piece? That's never the reason for doing it, but it allows you to have a mic. Yeah, it's a pretext. And it's
for
fantastic.
me, it helps me. I know I don't fully know what I think about something until I write about it. And so even though it's really maddening, and I even have a writing coach who I've worked with on and off over the years, and it's maddening sometimes where you hear like, oh, that's not so clear. And you're like, oh, you're right. There's some wrinkle in my thinking that isn't yet worked out. But the other thing I'd say is writing is the closest thing we have to telepathy, because maybe the closest thing we have to telepathy is really podcasts, but podcasts, you can't navigate them. They're magical in lots of other ways. But when I write, I can navigate through somebody's thoughts and hear them in my brain. And it is really, probably the most powerful technology that I get to use on a daily basis.
And I'll say this, like, if I go back to how to make it more, from the question, more powerful stuff, I think first is honesty. It's about the power of your voice. You have to know your voice, and don't be intimidated by your voice. Don't think it has to be. It's like, you're not doing Shakespeare. You're not the British actor. Like, you're talking for you. It has to be colloquial. If you're doing data, make sure your data is right and make sure it's presentable in a way that people will understand at all levels. You have to have a sense of storytelling. What's your arc here? And you could leave the story with a question. It doesn't have to be something that is completely tied up.
Hollywood ending.
Yeah, the vulnerability in there is key. And I'd have to say this, like, one of the things I'm obsessed with in the cancel culture is the importance of humor to getting something over. When you are a writer, and I mean this in the best sense of the world, you are trying to answer questions, but you're also trying to persuade. And some of the best storytellers in the world are con men or salespeople. And I mean this in the best sense, not in the bad sense, which is know your audience.
Elizabeth Holmes was a great storyteller.
If I was speaking to an audience, I need to read the room. Is my narrative working in this room? Am I losing people there? That kind of, you have to ask your questions. And the key thing also, because I've written some controversial stuff, I remember I wrote a piece about Billy Bush losing his job at NBC because of the Trump video. And I felt it was very unfair because I put myself in the shoes of Billy Bush when I've heard something so untoward and was so uncomfortable by it that I may have laughed at a time where I should have spoken up. And I wrote this essay, and before I press publish, I called my high school friend, Noah Shackman. And Noah ran the Daily Beast at the time and now runs Rolling Stone. And he read the essay and he says, have you spoken to any women? Have you seen it through their eyes? And it was a great piece of advice. And I turned to 4 women that I'm very close with. who will give me straight feedback. They're from different walks of life, different jobs, different views. And I think it's very important that you have to have friends that you can share your writing with, who have different backgrounds, different takes on things, and can give
Tell
you
you
some
honestly.
feedback. You do not have to take feedback. You can disagree, you could disagree with feedback, but not getting the feedback in some cases is at your own.
Look, we say this as two guys, who come from a similar part of the world, look kind of similar, and talking to each other about it, but it's essential. I mean, and I try to thank those people when I write a piece and have that kind of, and the kitchen cabinet differs depending on the piece, but it always evolves. And I'll just say in my own little moment of vulnerability with you to say, even as many ways as you and I are similar, you are one of the more different people with whom I've had a long-term effective collaboration, because I'm a very linear guy, as you know. I've got 6 things to do today. I'm going to work my way down the list. If number 5, you are not a linear guy. You are a person who associates and brings in things. And sometimes you live by a schedule and sometimes you don't. And I think the thing that for me has worked in our collaboration is just the sense of extreme honesty, that I know exactly where you're coming from at all times. I know with you, word is bond. I know that if you're unsure about something, you're going to tell me you're unsure. And that's really powerful. And it's why, and you referred to this earlier, and I want to ask you about it. It's why when you went through your health stuff, you opened up on a level that you hadn't before, because you'd be very happy to talk about your views on work things. But maybe I'd love if you were willing to share with folks, what did you go through and what did you learn?
I didn't realize it at the time, but as much as I talk and verbose and write and had jobs that were public, I would deflect on anything having to do with me that wasn't related to the technology or the content that I was working on. And I found myself at a moment where I wasn't married and my parents were dead, and was estranged from some of my family. And the heart disease shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was a surprise. And all of a sudden, it's like everything else melts away in that moment. It's just you're raw. It's hitting the nerve at the dentist. And I thought, and it's very interesting because the story that I met my fiance through that writing. And there was a whole level of different people that came out when I was writing honestly about how I was feeling and how scared I was, and the level of trust you get with an audience, because you forget that even your worst enemy has some problem. Even your worst enemy has lost someone or has gotten sick or whatever. And the different kinds of people that reached out to me when I was sick, and I think I got something like 15,000 emails at the time. It took me like 4 years or so to reply to each one of them, allowed me to be careful. And I remember when I was dating Liz and she knew certain things about me, I was very surprised and I was a little freaked out. I was like, how do you know these things? And she reminded me that I had written all this stuff. And when you write 5 days a week, you just forget. It's not that every word's not important to you, but it's a thing. And I think, and generally that honesty led to honesty in my life, and then honesty in my writing. That was not something that was planned. It wasn't an exercise that I exercised. It sort of showed up like, and I hate to say it in this way, Roy, but it was like a magic of like, when you were on that door and I was a day away from, had I, not gotten checked, probably dying with these blockages, there is a sense of appreciation that you have because you never considered those things before. And the freedom that gives you, it could be scary, but in a selfish way, it also built an audience that just trusted me on other stuff. And, I think the other thing I'd say about writing, or today's day, one of the things I don't like about culture today is that in a company, if you fail, unless you're in a terrible company, there isn't the rush to blame you and all these other kinds of things. You pick up, you learn, you augment, you move on. That's in government and sometimes in public talking. If you say something off or you make a mistake, it's the end of you. And what I forget about, because I've been a canceller, let's face it, this, is that I've said things before out of turn or not thinking, and I wasn't. And when vulnerability opened up in the writing because I was sick, and I got letters from people who I disagree with, or I did not like, or I really thought life differently, I realized that they were more than one dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the paradox, is like you see the humanity in people, but at the same time, there are things that somebody can do that maybe after doing that one thing, they should no longer be the CEO of a large corporation. And certainly people have been excluded from these things for a lot less, historically. And so but that's why it's a paradox. And, the thing that I want to just say about that, in gratitude for you opening up, is, when you said like, okay, I was able to get more honest, I think we have this mistaken view as a society that qualities like honesty are innate, that you have honest people and dishonest people, good people and bad people. And the way I see it is honesty is a practice. It's a skill. You build it like a muscle. And some people, like, I'll never be in the NBA, but I can still get better at basketball. And so some people are just exceptionally honest and start out good at it, and some people not so much. But the fact that you've been able to open up this new horizon and it's definitely been inspiring to me. Seeing, and by the way, I say this as a compliment. It's not like you're a different person now. It's not like.
Well, I'll say this. If I'm being very honest now, I was probably the most dishonest person that I've ever known with myself. With everybody else, I think I was a lawyer friend and I was great at giving people advice about their life. But until those moments, I lied to myself a lot on a daily basis about a lot of stuff. And I think a lot of the verbosity or the personality
it was a distraction from all that.
Was a distraction from a lot.
Yeah, well, here's to seeing it. I got to wrap. But I'm just on the day before Thanksgiving, I want to say I'm grateful for years of collaboration and friendship, and just here's to many more years to come. And come back and let's do some more of this. For those of you who've stuck with us, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is neither of us has any idea what you should do. Is all sharing our stories. And
I want to throw back at you, which is, you can get money from anybody. You can get anyone to invest, but the people that are going to be honest with you and are as behind you in your failure as they are in your success is really what you want. And Bloomberg Beta and you specifically have been that kind of partner and friend, and I love you for it.
Thank you. I love you too. All right. Happy Thanksgiving, and to be continued.
Be good, bud.